Hello everyone, I'm Sylvia from Fairlight Tarot. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my top 10 tarot decks for beginners. So at the beginning I didn't know whether I was the right person to do this tag because I haven't been a beginner for a long time, and I thought, what do I know? I don't remember what were the things that I was looking for in a tarot deck when I was a beginner. But then I thought, okay, but how about this? I take it from a different perspective, and what about I am going to show you the tarot decks that I wish I had when I was a beginner. Let's see how that works out. Well, the first one is rather obvious. It's an RWS deck. So this one is not your most typical RWS deck. You do have a lot of original ones from 1909. You don't necessarily need to grab a copy of the original 1909 RWS deck. As long as you grab something that makes you want to study the deck, a deck that talks to you, something that you find easy to relate to, maybe the colors are more on, your cup of tea, etc. In my case, for example, I chose this deck, and this is the edition by the Total Tarot magazine, by the way. So it is completely legitimate. It has been licensed by Lo Scarabeo to be printed specifically for these issues, these magazine issues. And however, there are a few differences between this edition and the standard Lo Scarabeo editions. And the reason why I prefer this one is because, first of all, it's not glossy. I'll show you. Well, first of all, it's not borderless. It is more traditional with the small thin white borders. It's not glossy, as you can see. It's semi-gloss, it's really not 100% matte, as I would have preferred it, but at least it's not catching the light too much. And the backs are slightly different. So these backs, the symbols in the backs are slightly smaller than the ones in the official version of the Radiant Wise Spirit. And they are more similar to the edition from 2017. That edition has been reprinted. Therefore, when I heard that Total Tarot magazine was releasing this edition, which would have been more faithful to the 2017 edition of this tarot deck, I actually jumped on it because I really wanted it. And let me tell you, the original 2017 edition is called the Dirty Pam. I heard it the first time in Simon's channels, Simon from the Hermit's Cave, and I thought it was really funny to call it that because it does look like the coloring is a bit different from the original version, and it looks like it's a bit dirty in a good way, let's say dirty in a good sense. And this deck is an absolutely joy to work with. The symbology is all there. So if you need an RWS deck, of course go with your guts. If you like the original 1909, if you prefer the Dirty Pam, which by the way now actually costs around $200-300 to buy, and this one is only, well, 30, it comes out at about $30 Australian to buy when you buy the magazine. This deck is very useful if you're a beginner. It's very enjoyable if you're not a beginner anymore, if you're an intermediate or if you're an advanced. In my case, I still enjoy using it. I just really like to reconnect to a deck like this because I like to look at the symbology that had been chosen at the beginning, over 100 years ago. So this deck is definitely recommended. If you don't find this particular edition, fear not. You can always buy the official Radiant Wise Spirit by Lo Scarabeo, or as I said before, just buy any RWS deck you feel comfortable with. The important thing is that I do believe that a deck like this should not be missing from anyone's collection, especially if you're serious about reading tarot. because for the reasons that I said before, because the symbology is all there and it's the primary source. It means that it was the original way in which the tarot had been conceived, or this edition, let's say the RWS, had been conceived. So this is the Radiant Wise Spirit. And just in case RWS is not your cup of tea, you prefer the Thoth, I do recommend the, as a beginner, I recommend the larger version. This is, as you can see, it's quite large. I'm just gonna open the box. This is published by US Games. This one specific is rather old. It's an older deck that I bought decades ago. These decks come in 3 different sizes, I believe, like a really small one, a medium, and this one, which is the large one. And just to give you an example of a standard tarot deck, there you go. So this is basically how much bigger it is, wider and taller. And the reason why I do recommend this larger version is because you really have the opportunity to have a look at all the symbols. Sometimes, so this is a, let's say it's a different system from the RWS. If you're a beginner, you might want to keep that in mind. And it's, artistically speaking, it's very beautiful. The color palette is amazing. The colors are so vibrant and live. They really jump out of the card. But as you can see, there's different trumps. For example, there's different majors. So number 14, which is usually temperance, in this case, in the Thoth system, is called art, and so on. There's a few differences. What I really like about this edition, as I said before, is that the image, because the cards are larger, the image is also larger, and it is much easier to pay attention to some of the details that you can see. It's a very studied deck, the Thoth in general. I believe that there's more Thoth study groups on Facebook, for example, than any other tarot systems. So more than Marseille and more than RWS. And it's probably because it's not the easiest system to understand and to get familiar with. So I do believe that if you do want to embark upon a journey on studying this deck, you should probably seek, the help of a group or of a teacher or someone that knows what they're doing, that knows the system very well and can point out at everything that you need to look at in a card whenever it comes out and whenever you need to apply yourself to get a reading done. Even though, as you can see, the minors are rather pippish. I must say the artwork is not everyone's cup of tea, I understand that, but it is so beautiful. It's so packed with esotericism. There's a lot of guidebooks. And I personally still have, there's so many, I personally still have to find one that I really like. Let's put it this way. There's bits and pieces here and there that I appreciate, but I still have to find one guidebook where I can find everything I need. But in any case, so this is the Thoth Tarot, and it is by Aleister Crowley. Now I wanted to show you a Marseille, so Tarot de Marseille deck, but then at the last minute I changed my mind and I thought, no, I want to show a Pippish deck, but still not necessarily a Marseille deck. So the White Sage Tarot is still an excellent tarot for beginners. Not if you want to study a Marseille. Obviously you need a Marseille deck if you want to study that particular system, but the White Sage Tarot is very interesting because, as you can see, well, first of all, because it's a tarot in a tin, therefore it's smaller than a traditional standard size, and I can show you again. And I can explain why that is actually a good thing if you're a beginner. See how smaller it is. This is a traditional size, and this is shorter and narrower. And the reason why I think it's a good thing is that the possibilities are endless when it comes to spreads. And when you're a beginner, you are going to try hundreds of different spreads. Because it's fun. Let's be honest, it's fun to try different spreads. The problem with spreads though is that whenever they are complex, whenever they include more than 5 cards, for example, and you have a standard size tarot deck, it's going to require a lot of room, a lot of space. Whenever you can, my recommendation is, if you find a cheap tarot in a tin, grab it, because that reduces, you know, quite consistently, quite significantly the space, the room that is required. This deck is also, I chose this deck because it's very peepish. Very beautiful. The artwork is fantastic and the color palette is amazing. I really like the pastel colors that you can find in this deck. The reason why I think it's a tarot, it's an essential tarot for beginners, is because once you know your way around the RWS system and the minors specifically, then you need a deck like this in order for you to keep on practicing your knowledge of the pips. So of the minors, basically. There are very much hints at new elements related to the cards. So you'll notice that there's always, for example, a few either ribbons for, like in this case, or splashes of colors in an otherwise quite monochromatic card. And the reason is to be found in the guidebook, or rather in the 2 cards that come together with the guidebook. And it's because these colors correspond to the chakra colors. So for example, in the 2 of swords here, you will see that the green color, like this one, corresponds to Anahata, the Anahata chakra. And in this case, you can read, okay, heart center, green light, transformation center, air energy, obviously because it's referred to the suit of swords. So it's very interesting to have a look at the association between the cards and the colors of the chakras. This may sound counterintuitive for someone who's a beginner to already step, you know, outside of the traditional RWS, study peepish decks, and study chakras, associations and colors, etc. However, I do believe that it makes it a lot more interesting for someone who's picking up tarot. Why? Because it's not just related to tradition. It may show you that tarot came as an instrument, a tool for persons with intuitions, to just attune to their own selves in some cases, hence, you know, the references to the chakras, but also for divination purposes, for self-care practice. So it can show you that you can really combine a few different systems of knowledge into one without going too deeply into the knowledge itself. So it's a bit of a way to introduce the fact that tarot can be associated with different systems as well. And plus, I really believe that Theresa Hutch is the creator of this deck. And by the way, good news, there's a new, I think it's an Oracle deck coming out, and it's already on pre-order from US Games, and it's the same kind of artwork, it's the same kind of color scheme, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I really love all of her decks. So this is the White Sage Tarot by Theresa Hutch. And this is the Tarot of the Abyss by Anatorian. This is also published by US Games. The reason why I've included this deck is because it's one of the best decks, at least in my collection, or that I know of, that gives you the possibility to read tarot both in the traditional way and in a numerological way. And I'll show you what I mean with that. Mainly, the difference is to be seen in the suit of swords, and I've got here the two cards, so the Ten of Swords and the Three of Swords. As you can see in these two cards, the depiction of the Three and the Ten of Swords are quite popular, the ones that you can find in 99% of the decks. But if you are interested in knowing that there is a different way to read these two cards in specific, then I would definitely recommend you start approaching the concept of numerology in tarot, because it's incredibly interesting, and because it also gives you the possibility to have an edge, you know, on how you read tarot. It gives you the possibility to just switch between traditional and numerological interpretation of the cards. Personally, I almost always use a numerological interpretation. That's the way I see it. And it comes from the fact that I believe that the suit of swords is the suit of the mind, and anything that comes from the progression of the numbers in the suit should be referred to the suit of the mind, constantly to the suit of the mind. Whereas in this case, I feel that, for example, the Three of Swords are seen as a heartbreak, an ending, for example, in a relationship or something. It's not necessarily, you can relate it, of course, to the suit of the mind, but to me it speaks more of feelings, and that to me is more related to the suit of cups. And so if I look at it as the growth, so number 3 in numerology is the number of growth, so the growth in the suit of the mind it's got also some negative aspects, that it might mean overthinking, over worrying, for example. So the fact that we have this possibility to interpret even the Ten of Swords, for example, that the suit of the mind numerologically represents the completion of the suit. So after everything that has happened from number 1, from the Ace to number 9, we then reach the culmination, the completion of the suit. So I finally found the alternative cards. So we've got the Three of Swords, the traditional Three of Swords here, as you can see on the left, and on the right we've got the numerological Three of Swords. And as you can see, the numerological one, it depicts a person looking at a book. The Three Swords are planted in the book, and it looks as if this is triggering these letters to fly out of the book, and while they fly out of the book, they actually transform themselves into birds, and they go into the mind of the person. This to me speaks of over worrying, overthink. That's definitely overthinking, and it's definitely something that I want to use as a reading for the Three of Swords. And now if we look at the Ten of Swords, for example, again we get on the left the traditional Ten of Swords, and on the right the numerological Ten of Swords. Now the fact that the Ten of Swords is seen as this complete and utter debacle, so it's the end of the end, it's the rock bottom, it's the you cannot get any worse than that. That's an overkill for me. Whenever I read it traditionally, I always read it as an overkill. You don't necessarily need 10 swords to kill a person now, do you? So what I really like is in the numerological interpretation of the card, we can actually see that there's an owl facing a person. And it looks as if this person is actually come to a place of peace, of serenity, as you can see from the expression in the face. And there's this confrontation, but it's even though it's a fierce kind of confrontation, particularly because the owl looks a little bit like a threat. However, there is understanding going on, and the swords are depicted as if they were feathers on the owl. This to me speaks about wisdom, is the wisdom you achieve after living through everything that has happened in the suit of the swords, from the Ace to the 9. And that's one very, so in the general sense, the Ten of Swords is seen as the end, so it's an overkill, as I said before, it's rock bottom. However, in rock bottom, you can find knowledge, you can find wisdom, you can find the reason to pick yourself up, because you know that you have reached rock bottom, and therefore you just gain knowledge about everything that has happened. You made it your own weapon and you just start using it. That's the main reason why I recommend this tarot deck, also for beginners. There's many other reasons. First of all, it's by Anna Torian, who's one of the most skilled illustrators of all time. I believe her artwork is just absolutely spectacular. She's also the illustrator of the Bones That Unearth Flesh Tarot, but she's also illustrated, well, she's also created the Oracle of Echoes, for example, the Clair de Lune Renormand, and the Tarot of the Hidden Waters. Many of these cards are really beautiful. They are very evocative. Look at the Eight of Cups. It looks like this person has really had enough, and she's definitely leaving a broken situation behind, you know. But she, again, there's fierceness in their eyes, there's serenity, there's peace. This tarot deck, by the way, is I really like the cardstock. Is one of the decks that I use the most whenever I do a very specific kind of reading, and I have to say I have been using it countless times and it's still really good. I mean, I reckon probably the edges are a bit worn out because I do use it, but I have to say there's no creases on the cards and no scratches. I'm very happy with the performance of this cardstock, which is not always the case with mass market decks, I have to say. So this is the Tarot of the Abyss by Anna Torian. And when it comes to something very specific to tarot, a ritual or a practice very specific to tarot, sometimes you may have heard, if you're a beginner, you may have heard a lot of tarot reader talking about shadow work. Now, for me, I think I've mentioned that in a couple of videos before, but for me, shadow work is looking into something that is in the shadow right now, in myself, bringing it back into the light, identifying it, acknowledging it, accepting it, and if it's something that needs to be released, it will be released. If it's something that needs to be nurtured, it will be nurtured. So it's not necessarily, because I've heard a lot of times people referring to shadow work as sometimes a way to accept your darkest truth. That's only half of the work for me. It's not just that. It's also recognizing that I have wonderful skills as a human being. I can do wonderful things, but because or whatever these skills are in the shadow, I need to bring them back into the light and nurture them. Now, when we talk about releasing the parts of ourselves that are in the shadow and that we need to release, one deck that I highly recommend to do this kind of work, to do this kind of shadow work, is the Deviant Moon Tarot by Patrick Valenza. In my case, I have the borderless edition, and I'm very, very happy about this this edition, the borderless one. It's slightly, the shape is a bit odd for me, to be honest. It's slightly taller than other tarot. So again, to just give you a comparison, it's as you can see, it's slightly thinner, not much, but a little bit, but it is, as you can tell, it's taller. And because I have small hands, it is a bit of a problem to shuffle, but I don't mind because it's such a beautiful deck. Now, this deck is very intense. I think that's the right word to use. I did not fully understand this deck until I actually bought the large book. It's not even a guidebook, it's actually a large hardcover book that Patrick Valenza released, in which he explains the creative process and the stories behind each and every card, but he also tells you, for example, with sketches, the progression. You know, how did he get to this 10 of Wands, for example? Was it originally like that at the beginning or not? Has it come through a number of different variations, etc., which is incredibly interesting. But it's also because there's aspects about these cards that are not necessarily easy to understand when you look at them. And again, this might seem counterintuitive for a beginner to approach this deck. However, it's to me, it's part of that stimulation of the interest of showing you as a beginner that tarot is not just used in one way. It's not just a divination tool. The expression of a tarot is not just an RWS clone, for example, but over the years of the decades, there have been a lot of really good artists that produce their own tarot deck. Some of them are very famous, some of them are very beautiful. Now, in this case, for example, this is the Death card, and I think I was talking about this card before. Now, it may seem like this card is a bit cruel because it looks like it's a mother that is pushing away a son. You know, just literally just stepping on the son or the daughter or the child. But when you actually read the a large guidebook, it explains that this is an invitation to life. This is an invitation to, you have been born. It's like saying you have been born, you are in this world, my child. You cannot go back to the safety of the womb. You have to stay in this world because you have to live. You have to do your own mistakes. You have to have your own experiences. You have to, you know, grow and mature, and you have to have your own life. And I really enjoy the way this card is depicted. It's a very meaningful way to approach the Death card. And it's not, it's probably, when you're a beginner, if you're like me, you probably want to know why the Death card is not death. You know, the logic would tell you, okay, if something says death, well, then it means death. Well, no, or at least 99% of the cases, the Death card is actually rebirth. So it actually tells you that something is not serving you anymore, and you have to get out of that. There has to be some transformation, there has to be a regeneration, there has to be a rebirth, there has to be a start from scratch. And whenever you find a deck that depicts the Death card in such a really beautiful and poetic almost way, I think that that's a winner. But I also think that for a beginner, it gives you an ulterior explanation on how to view that card, and perhaps the next time you read it, and whenever you do a spread and the Death card comes up, you will remember this card, and you will remember the additional meaning that you can apply to this card. So this is the Deviant Moon Tarot. This is the Borderless edition by Patrick Valenza. And if you're a beginner, you may have heard about inner child work as well. Now, inner child work, to be honest, can be done with pretty much any deck. The inner child work refers to a dialogue. It's literally a dialogue that you are going to perform with your own inner child, as if your inner child were a different person. Or not necessarily a different person, but someone you can have this dialogue with. So it's obviously part of yourself. It's in yourself. But it's not necessarily easy to access. So it's a voice that has been, in many cases, has been silent for perhaps many years. It's a voice that has been asking questions in the past, questions that have not been answered. It's a child voice, but it's the child of the communion with nature. It's the child that resembles a fool. So it's the child that has not been corrupted yet by life. So it's as if the concept behind it is as if when we're children, we are at one with everything that is around us, and then unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you see it, experiences start detaching us from the rest. So they start also corrupting us in a sense that we start expecting things to go the wrong way because we had bad experiences. And this is called maturing, but on a different level, it's also unfortunately losing that kind of marvel, the power of being at once with nature, the power of being a fool in its own terms. So someone who's stepping out, you know, jumping into something with enthusiasm. We're always a bit jaded when we are not a child anymore. Reconnecting with your inner child may bring a lot of energy. It may bring a lot of enthusiasm back, but it may also help you repair a lot of damage that may have been done. So this deck is very useful for that. It's a deck that not everyone likes. It's not everyone's cup of tea, and I realize that. Because like the Deviant Moon, it's a very intense kind of imagery that can sometimes be a little bit triggering, but then again, so is inner child work. So my suggestion is perhaps you know, use a different, softer kind of deck, and I have one and I'll show you later for inner child work. But if you're comfortable with this deck, this will give you really good results. So this is the Nicoletta Ceccoli Tarot, and it's published by Illustrative. And this is the tarot I was talking about before. So if the Ceccoli Tarot is a bit too intense to do inner child work for you, then I definitely recommend this tarot. This tarot is the Mara Luna Tarot. It's an indie tarot, but it can be easily purchased in a couple of websites. Off the top of my head, I think it's the Make Playing Cards deck website, and the Game Crafter, what's it called? Game Crafter website. Anyway, I will put the links of both of them in the description box below. This tarot deck is very, very soft, is very gentle. As you can see, even really intense cards like the Nine of Swords, they still use the kind of soft color palette and the soft, you know, drawings. It's not a confrontational kind of deck. It is a hug deck in many respects. Many of the cards are just peepish, as you can notice, but some other cards are actually illustrated, which is a bit odd, an odd combination between the two. However, I find that it's a very easy reader. And there's a couple of lovers cards, so you can actually choose which one you want to use. It's such an amazing deck. It's beautiful, it's soft, gentle, it's kind of a hug deck. Even the devil, I mean, of course, you assume that is keeping someone on the leash here, but the person is not in the card. So it's the kind of deck that tells you the truth, but in a way that it doesn't hurt. So if the Nicoletta Ceccoli is a bit too intense for you to do in a child work, then I definitely recommend using this one for that kind of practice. So this is the Mara Luna Tarot, and as I said, it's an independently produced deck, which is also a really good introduction to indie decks. If you're a beginner, it might feel safer to concentrate, to focus on mass market produced decks, and generally speaking, it kind of is. However, if you want to have an indication on where you should start to, you know, get some interest in independently produced deck, this one is definitely one you should check out. The Mara Luna Tarot. I've included this deck because I think that when you're a beginner, you also want to know that there are decks that are really cool. You know, and this is definitely one of them. So this is the Ghosts and Spirits Tarot by Theresa Hutch. It is a mass market deck. It's been published by US Games. The reason why to me this is a super cool deck is because there are ghosts and spirits legends behind each and every card. And reading the guidebook is actually like reading a ghost story. It is so beautiful, it's cool, it's evocative, it's amazing, it's full of details. You can get literally lost in all of the details for each and every card. It also teaches you as a beginner to go back to the guidebook every now and then, because these myths and legends of ghosts and spirits are not necessarily well known, at least not to me, they weren't. And it is actually a really good exercise, because there is a tendency to believe that once you learn the RWS meanings of the cards, you don't need to read the guidebooks anymore, which couldn't be more wrong. I actually always recommend reading all of the guidebooks unless they're really basic, and of course there are examples for that too, but the reason why I do recommend that is because you get to know what the intention of the creator was, and there might be so many different aspects to a card that you haven't even thought of. And you can be an expert. Seriously, you can be a tarot teacher, and yet whenever there's a new tarot or a tarot like this, it is beneficial for you to still have a look at the guidebook. And let's face it, this deck is just so cool. I mean, look at the colors, look at the line work, the artwork. It's just fantastic. I really, really like it, and I really, really enjoy it. So this was the Ghosts and Spirits Tarot by Theresa Hutch. And to remain in the same theme, I have chosen the Shadowlands Tarot by Monica Budierski. And the reason why I've chosen this is because, like the Ghost and Spirits Tarot, it also gives you the idea that tarot can actually be fun. They don't necessarily have to be traditional to be conducive of a good reading experience. So this tarot deck is actually traditional. The meanings of the cards are not different. If you look at the Eight of Pentacles, for example, this is the typical meaning of the hard work. Yes, you're almost there, you're almost finished, but don't stop now, because you haven't actually finished. So you still need to apply yourself. It's such an amazing deck though, because to me, this is really quirky, really funny. It's one, I think that I featured it in when I did my good mood decks, or if I didn't, it was just, it was just right there, it just missed. I really enjoy working with this deck. It's obviously, well, look at the Nine of Swords. This is a typical Nine of Swords for me, because I do have arachnophobia and I live in Australia, so there's a lot of spiders. And I don't want to scare anyone, but they're quite big. Although there is one positive thing, the bigger they are, they say, I still have to believe them, but they say that if they are the big ones, like your hand size, they're the harmless ones. So whenever my husband says you shouldn't be afraid of spiders because those ones are harmless, I always answer, not if they give you a heart attack, they're not. So, but this deck is so much fun. It just puts me in a good mood whenever I use it, which is funny because it's actually it's meant to be a bit creepy, but it's the quirky, funny kind of creepy. And also, to be honest, it's actually kind of cute. I mean, look at this card, it's so cute. I really enjoy this deck. I also really enjoy the guidebook, which is a rather chunky one. The only thing that I'm like a bit not too happy about is the gold gilding, but to be honest, even though I did use this deck quite a fair bit, it's holding up well. But it's holding up quite well, I would say. So this is the Shadowlands Tarot by Monica Budierski. And last, but by no means least, is the Savi Soul Tarot by Judy Whitledge. This tarot deck is amazing. This to me is an excellent deck for beginners because it shows you that tarot can be very modern. You can have a very modern tarot deck and still have an instant connection to the meanings of the cards. It is very beautiful. Of course, there's a lot of layers to it, and if you look at the guidebook, you will see, and many of the layers may not be necessarily accessible to a beginner. However, by the same principle that I've been showing you, the Deviant Moon, for example, I can assure you that this deck is very, very evocative. It resonates with you. It speaks to you. It's a deck you have an actual conversation with. And the way in which your intuition is stimulated and triggered whenever you're looking at these cards can actually be very important to you, because as a tarot reader you also need to understand, and the sooner the better, that not everything is written. So if you get a sense for a card because just by looking at it, it may mean that that card to you in that precise moment needs to be read in that precise way. And this is one of the decks that I believe actually channels a lot of this. It really stimulates and taps and nurture your intuition, and I highly, highly recommend it. By the way, so I spoke as of the 8th of February, I spoke to Julie. She still has a few copies in stock. I will put her Instagram handle in the description box below if you can reach out, if you want to reach out for her. In the website it says that she doesn't ship overseas, but however, if you get in touch with her, she can try and see what she can do about it, and she's very, very helpful. And I could not recommend this deck enough, because it will make you a better reader, absolutely 1000%. So this is the Savi Soul Tarot by Julie Whiteley. And because if you follow my channel, you'll know by now that if I'm told that I only need 10, I always make sure to have 11. There is an honorable mention, and it's the Dreamy Way Tarot by Romy Choi. This is also published by US Games. I think this is an older edition. I modified this deck. It came with white borders. To be honest with you, I would probably buy another copy to have the borders, but not because I regret chopping off the borders, because I really do believe that the artwork needs to breathe in this deck, because it's such a beautiful artwork, but because I actually think that it works really well with the borders as well. Does it make sense? In any case, it's a really beautiful deck, and the reason why it's here is because, again, I wanted to reinforce the concept that tarot doesn't have to be traditional to work well. Tarot doesn't have to be one way. Tarot can be diverse. Tarot can be different. Tarot can be fun. Tarot can be creepy. It can be modern. It can be ancient. It can be whatever you want it to be, or even better, tarot can be whatever speaks to you. So if you prefer an animal deck, by all means, get yourself the animal, I don't know, the Wild Unknown, for example, or even better. The Wild Unknown is very peepish, but the Oak Ash and Thorn, for example, is a fully illustrated animal deck. It's one of the most beautiful ones. The artwork is fantastic. This is to show you that even something very modern, very bohemian, it works. It absolutely works, because even as a beginner, you have your own experiences. You're not a beginner who's 2 years old, okay? You're a beginner who has already, well, I started reading when I was 14, so I didn't have that many life experiences, but I grew up with tarot. And so whenever I had an experience, I could actually recognize myself in the images in the tarot. And I would have loved to see this tarot deck when I was a beginner, because it would have meant the world to me. It would have meant seeing myself in these cards. It would have represented such a strong bond, and I didn't have it, because when I started reading, we didn't have these variety of tarot decks that there is around. And if you're a beginner now, you're very lucky, because you really, really can choose anything you want, anything you like. So thank you so much for staying with me till the end. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. More to come. Have a great day.